Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Today, I wanted to talk about the image of Saint Michael the Archangel, specifically the one where he has either a sword or a spear and is pinning down Satan. And kind of the meaning of it, essentially, I believe it's kind of, you can say it's like Saint Michael the Archangel, cutter of BS, right? And so I'll kind of walk through it, how I came to this conclusion with everything and the meaning behind it, and we'll see what you guys think. Before I continue, though, if you guys can please like and subscribe the video, would really appreciate it. I really enjoy doing these. If you like watching them, I appreciate if you follow along. So first, let's talk about in the beginning in Genesis, because that's where kind of it outlines the whole entire landscape of the symbolism and different things like that throughout the rest of the stories. And let's look at the image of the serpent in the garden, the evil one. And we see that, first of all, he's present as the serpent. This has been translated in many different ways through imagery. Currently in modern times, he's a snake, because obviously we cannot have dragons. Other times previously, the serpent was translated into something like a dragon. But in essence, it's kind of a being that lacks form. So if you think about a snake or a serpent, their body kind of slithers around, and it's kind of like fluid and malleable, and so it lacks like a solid form, and so it's wrapped around the tree in the garden. And then you have the image of the tree, which is sturdy, it's in place, it's kind of like tough to move. And so you have this kind of structure with an agent of change that's wrapped around the tree. This image is actually really deep image of the whole world. I mean, if you think about, for example, like our bones are like the tree, and then all the veins and stuff around it are kind of like the serpent. And the thing is, like, the veins flow with blood, so they're filled with water, and so it's showing kind of an aspect of a change around the structure. So you can think of something like seasons, right? So we have days that go by, but there's an aspect of change through those days, to the change of the weather and things like that, through the season and things like that. Even day by day, the sun comes up, the moon, and the sun comes down, and then the moon comes up. There's this aspect of a structure with change associated with it. And in the case specifically with the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, this agent of change changed something from love and unity to death and destruction, and bringing about sin in the world. And so you have this dragon in the middle of the garden, and this kind of monster is replicated in different ways throughout different fairy tales and folk tales. Now, it's also important to remember that not all monsters or all beings that are on the edge are necessarily evil. You can have good monsters, like something like angels, right? They're described, especially in the Old Testament, as being very kind of scary and monstrous, spinning discs on themselves with many eyes, or six-winged, many-eyed. You have the cherubim in the garden that has 4 different heads of a bull and an eagle and the human and different things like that, with the flaming sword. And so just because something's a monster or it has like a being of a serpent does not make it evil. And so God also creates in Genesis and early translations, it's translated to either sea creatures or sea monsters. So in modern interpretations, it just says it creates the fish of the seas, but ancient text really was understood as something like sea monsters. And so it was known that God created the Leviathan, right? And the Leviathan is also an aspect of great change. So the Leviathan usually awakes when the world, you can say, gets too loud or too carnivalistic, and then wakes up, swallows the world, and it kind of starts again. You also have, following this pattern, you also have something like a kraken. Now, I really like the image of the kraken because it has many tentacles, right? So it's almost like many serpents on that is part of it. It also lacks kind of like form. It's it's malleable and things like that. But it's usually you have these images of, krakens that attack ships. Ships are also a structure kind of like a tree, and so it's like wrapped around the ship. Now the destruction is kind of more obvious in the kraken because that's kind of what it does. It is definitely destruction, the same way the evil in the garden brought about death upon the world. And so I hope that gives like a good idea of kind of like these monsters and things like that, of lacking identity, being very fluid, and causing chaos and kind of destruction into the world. And another aspect within Genesis is Noah's Ark, which the story, lots of apologetics say that it's kind of like the beginning of what baptism will be like a washing away of the what was before and becoming, chosen with God. Another aspect is the ark being like the church amongst the sea of the world. And so you want to stay in the church. You don't want to fall out into sea for, salvific purposes. And so, that also brings about a grander picture of, if imagining a ship being kind of something like the church and a kraken attacking it and trying to bring it down, right? In the same way, it's said that, Satan is trying to destroy the church. You have Christ saying things like nothing will prevail against it. And so, in a sense, it's like an unsinkable ship that we're on. But this is all these kind of imagery that we should keep in mind as we're talking about this. And then lastly, you have the other monsters, like mentioned before, which is angels. And so what's interesting about angels is that they live in a hierarchy. And it's important to understand that hierarchy because it shows us kind of like a ladder into how we can go about going to heaven following that hierarchy. And so the most absolute top important thing is singing glory to God. And so you have the seraphim on the very top of the hierarchy that just sing holy, holy, holy to the being of God all the days, right? And so that is the most important thing. And then as you go down lower, you kind of go down lower, closer to, man meeting in through this hierarchy of man, going down into angels and how man interacts with it. And, close to the bottom, you have the archangels. And so we only know of 3 named angels, which I believe are all archangels. And so we have the Archangel Gabriel, the Archangel Raphael, and the Archangel Michael. Now, Michael is said to be the leader of God's armies. We see him in the book of Daniel in an apocalyptic sense. And then we also see him in Revelation, which is also an apocalyptic book. And he strikes down and defeats Satan. So he's a warrior character, and what's interesting is that he's also appears in both in 2 books that have to do with an apocalypse. And so it seems like Michael is kind of represented also in a way of something that brings an end to something for a new beginning. An inverse of the serpent, you can say, where the serpent brought about death, he defeats death and brings about life, or he defeats evil and brings about life within the context of the story. And so you have the angel there. Now you have this image where you have Saint Michael usually above and Satan below, and Saint Michael's either piercing the demon or the devil with a spear, or he has a sword that he's pointing. It looks like he's about to, pierce the devil with his sword. And so with this imagery, I would like us to think like, we also should think virtues. The angels of virtues are very good at understanding of what angels are like. So, you have things like wisdom, patience, and different things like that. And those are kind of, we embody those, right? And so we can copy these ideals of these different aspects in the hierarchy of angels to embody them more here down in the world, right? To kind of, like it said, to build the kingdom of God in the world. And we can do that through the embodiment of those angels that we have available to us. And so Saint Michael is kind of like this ideal too. And so you can think of it as like the ideal of the warrior. And one way a warrior can fight is through truth. And so thinking of the imagery of something like the kraken around the ship, and then a spear kind of piercing into the Kraken. Now, if you imagine these tentacles, like all these chaotic elements, right? You can keep cutting at all the tentacles, or something like the Hydra cutting at all the heads. But if you don't hit the heart of the problem, you're going to get lost and tangled up in all the tentacles, you can say, and pulled to the bottom of the depths. And this is also true in, modern day, even, not to make this like politically charged or anything, but you have all these isms in the world today. So you have, things like feminism, you have things like postmodernism, communism, like there's all these isms. And these are all tentacles, you can say, of the same being, right? And you can kind of try to follow them historically and things like that, but they're so intertwined with different things that even if you study the history and stuff, you can kind of get lost in it. And so it kind of like tangles you and confuses you, and you yourself start losing, you can say, your mind a little bit. But the image of Saint Michael kind of points to the heart of the matter, you can say, right? So it skips all the tentacles, it skips, some iterations have like Satan with a tail, right? It's that aspect of this like mixed identity, and it pierces right into the problem, right? Like it's basically saying all these tentacles, like all these isms, come from Satanism, essentially, right? Like you can say it comes from the devil. Those are things of the devil, right? They break down. Like, don't get lost in the tentacles, just aim for the heart of the matter. Right, so it's almost like the same aspect when you say like cut out the BS, right? Like it's all these mix-ups and unnecessary details, and just getting to the point, right? And the spear does the same thing, where you have this long object that gets to a point. A sword also has a point at the end, and it cuts. Another image of this actually is, you can even imagine Christ on the cross, like him himself being like this blade, descending down into Hades and destroying death, right? Sometimes you see this imagery also, especially like a lot of modern artists and things will do something where it's a cross, and the cross is kind of like, is a cross on the top, and it slowly turns into a sword, and it's like piercing a serpent or a dragon or something. Now, you might be saying, the image isn't of a Kraken, right? It's a devil, like an anthropomorphic type of a devil on the ground. But even in that case, usually when it's created, there's aspects of it in the image, like I mentioned before, where he has a tail or a mixed body, including dragons, like in medieval ages, usually were not just flying lizards with wings, but a chaotic being that lacked identity in itself. So it might have paws of a lion or claws of a lion with wings of an eagle or a bird, a head of a lizard or something, a tail of a scorpion. Like it was a mixed identity, right? It's a chaotic being and causes destruction, so it itself does not have a being. And so even with that, when you're piercing the serpent, it's kind of the same aspect of all these, you can say, parts of the dragon being like its tentacles, and it being pierced right in, getting to the point of what it is, and doing that. And in a sense, when you do that in your life, right, like when you find Christ to be the truth or whatever it may be, it starts a new era for you in your life, a new aspect of exploration. So it's not, there's like certain clarity you get in your mind, right? And so that's what that image is trying to portray to us, is this like cutting through all the BS and finding the truth, right? And so it's like I said, it's an unwrapping of these tentacles that can be around it. Another interesting aspect of this, though, is that you can look at something like I mentioned the tree. So like in Genesis, you have the serpent and the tree. And what's interesting is the tree is also like being able to follow that truth. So if you think of something like a family tree, right, you can follow all the branches and stuff, and you can follow it clearly, but it always leads back down to the main aspect. You can see that where it comes from. There's a clarity in it where, a mixture of tentacles, they're very hard to follow. And so St. Michael's spear, in a sense, is also kind of like this tree where you can follow and see the truth of things. It also follows to what Christ said as far as like, I did not come to bring peace, but come to bring the sword, right? Because uh, it's getting to the truth of the matter. Like sometimes when you hear the truth yourself, it feels like you've been cut or pierced in a way. Last aspect I kind of wanted to mention with this pattern of, piercing and tentacles and lack of identity is that Christ being pierced on his side in a way acts as a mirror image or inversion of that, where St. Michael is piercing and showing us where the beast is. You can say to free us from the grasp of the monster. When he gets pierced, he sprays out blood and water. Now, blood and water is related to certain aspects and patterns of the serpent, right? It's also flowy, kind of lacks a sturdy form. And so there's a piercing of it actually brings about this kind of almost like chaotic element out from his side. But in an interesting fashion, we know the one that did the piercing, Longinus, I believe it was called, actually ended up converting to the faith. So there's an act of baptism, right? And so there's this interesting pattern there again of piercing, but opening up something and it bringing out healing waters instead of killing the monster or the destruction or the agent of chaos. And so you also have this image with Moses striking the rock and the water comes out. It's kind of like foreshadowing of coming up of Christ also being opened up on his side. And so, hopefully this all kind of makes sense. It's pretty clear. I was interested your opinions here in your comments below of what you think about what I just said and what your opinions are on the story of the Saint Michael and that image specifically. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, if it's your first time or if you've been kind of listening to my other content, I would really appreciate if you liked and subscribed and followed along. I really enjoy doing these, and if you enjoy watching them, I would appreciate the support. But thank you everybody again for watching, and hopefully you'll watch the next one. So I will talk to everybody soon.